going to insert the colored clay slip into the text. So that's going to help this text pattern show up. So these tiles are nice and leather hard, right? You all know what leather hard's about. They're a little bit flexible, but they're still pretty stiff. And when you use this tool, oh, you're going to love this tool so much. It looks like calligraphy when you write with it. You know what calligraphy is, right? You've seen invitations and things like that. Well, the shape of this tool has an edge on it, so it gives a nice thick line and a thin line, like a calligraphy script. So it really looks like writing. And you can imagine, I'm writing all kinds of things when I'm writing on my pots. Sometimes it's about what's been going on that week. Sometimes it's just sort of news. Sometimes it's really personal. I have terrible writing, so I can write it, and I don't have to worry about anybody being able to read it. Yeah, these are different text elements I wrote around that pot. And I did these just this way. So you can do this. You could do this kind of inlay in this leather hard clay, or you can write in the clay without thinking about wax, and you can use your black underglazed. Use black underglaze.
Yep.
On the bisqueware. You know what bisqueware is, right? Bisqueware has been fired the first time before you glaze it. So if you have incised patterns that you want to use to make a cup, you can use any color really. What color is your clay? Is this whitish?
White.
Yeah, so you could actually carve any kind of pattern. You can use text, you can use design, you can draw pictures. If you're good at drawing, you want to draw something like that, you could inlay it with any color, and then you think about what glaze you put over that later for that pattern to show through. So right now, I want to show you how that little bit of wax works. Miss Adams made this really lovely slip that's nice and thick, and I put wax on this section. Can you see how that wax beads there? It's just running right off. We'll see. Maybe it's not resisting great, but either way, we're going to get this. You might need to make your slip a little bit thinner to push it into those patterns. So the writing is carved all the way into the clay. I used the brush to press that in, and with a quick sponge, I wiped it off. It has to start drying for you to see it really well, because the water is reflecting a little bit. But that black will be inlaid into that text mark now. It can get a little messy to do it this way. So if you're impatient or there's not enough time, it might be that a small group of you sort of get together, get your pieces just right, and Miss Adams will walk you through what that wax is. But I use that to mask off, to mask off an area. If I might want a square of different colored glaze, I can brush glaze into it and then wax over that to resist it from another glaze. So lots of ways to incorporate that kind of design work. Another super fun thing to do is to use sponges or foam to create stamps.
Just really quick, the wax for the bisque firing, the wax will burn away.
Oh yeah, that's right. The wax goes away. By the time you get it out of the kiln from the bisque and you're ready to glaze, the wax will be gone, and whatever it resisted will be left in its place. These are foam, like cushion foam. You can cut. I have all kinds of designs and shapes. Lately, I've been using sort of floral motifs. I want this. Need a little bit of this. Put this on the
That's
table.
just white slip.
Yeah, I want a little bit of black and a little bit of white. And again, you can use any color you want. You have experience with your own glazes and your own then the clay and what colors those come out. And so you kind of have to bring that little bit of experience and guess what's going to work for you. Maybe you cut a sponge and you say, boy, I really like doing this, and you cut all kinds of patterns and you just layer sponges in a similar kind of way as Arthur did those cut out transfer patterns, right? He planned ahead. And so with a little bit of slip on the sponge, it's like a printmaking technique. And depending on how much you load up the sponge with how much slip, maybe it's a little thicker or a little thinner. And to tell you the truth, I don't mind so much that these aren't exact because, oh here, I have it in my hand, because it's pottery and I'm not painting pictures of flowers. I'm using images, right? These are just sort of representational a little bit. So I can put multiple colors over that. It looks a little messy right now, doesn't it? But I'm going to take this stylus tool and just do a little bit of sgraffito carving over that white. Now I've got the slip on the surface and I've incised into the clay to create an incised line, and maybe I'll even do a double, maybe I'll even do that black. I'm not being particular about outlining it, I'm just sort of trying to draw loosely to give it a little bit of gesture. So you really get to know kind of how you, when you're doing other drawings, you pay attention if you're using big tools or little tools, or you're very detailed, and that can help you inform how you choose to focus on getting some of these techniques done too. I'm going to inlay the last of that text line just because it's sitting here and I kind of feel the need to get that completed. So that wax will burn away like we said, and we'll be all set with having some text show through that. So we've got texture, we've got stamping, we've got rolling, and I don't know if you've done this in your class either, but I love to make my own stamps out of clay. You can use this clay. These are rather small versions. I have tiny ones, I have big ones, I have a whole tub full of them. And actually, it's one of my favorite chapters in my book, actually. I love the pictures. If you look at these, I have one small end and I have one larger end on almost every stamp that I make, because that's one of those organizing principles of design, right? So we're bringing in all of your art classes can be applied right into one, and thinking about how you use design elements. So having a difference in scale can matter. Some of my stamps will have the positive image on one end and the reverse of it, or the negative, on the other end, right? So I can go back and forth and make fairly interesting surfaces. If you look at some of these little pieces that are here, you'll see some of that texture that I've applied on the slab here. I've impressed stamps into the surface, and I've applied slip trailing on top of the surface. So these colored slips that you have are black and white for now. I'm really, well, if you watched my video, you know I'm a fan of Aran knitting, which is sort of white on white pattern making, right? It's you get really great shadows when you are working with texture and white monochromatically. So these bottles that you have here, you might need to thin them down so that it flows better. Miss Adams made beautiful thick slip, and those of us who use slip for decorating would rather have it more thick than thin, because if it's too thin, it just falls right out of the bottle, right? But for slip trailing, we want it to be a little bit fluid so that I can squeeze the bottle gently and create a pattern coming out of the nozzle. So this is a trail of slip. We all know slip is thin clay, can be colored with different metal oxides to get different colors. This is just white, and you could see this white fairly well, although when it's fired, it'll be probably white on white, and it'll be like an embossed pattern raised up under a glaze. Kind of like the Aran knitting that I love. Oh, I should get an Aran sweater into my repertoire when I show up. You should have worn a sweater. Take the sweater off, before the demo. That's kind of funny. Anyway, so we've got slip trailing, we've got slip stamping, we've got slip carving and inlay. Have you heard the word sgraffito before? Mm-hmm. Right? So Sgraffito's a little tricky to show because I forgot to brush some slip on it. It'll be too wet to draw through. You want to let that get leather hard too. And all these patterns, I've just been interested in pattern for so long that I just keep piling up more and more patterns, but I think I find a reasonable balance of what's texture and what's pattern moving around a form. So I want to show you, I want to move onto the potter's wheel. I want to show you one of these little dishes because I did these. I said to myself, well, when I'm throwing and stretching texture on the outside, it's on the outside of a pot, like that orange, brown and orange vessel over there. The texture's on the outside, but I want texture on the inside, but that's where my hands are shaping the pot, right? So I had to think up a way to do that that might be a little bit effective. It's a really tricky technique, and actually if you look at this, there's a small fracture in this anyway. It's my outside in plate. I'm going to turn the outside of the pot to the inside so I can have that texture on the top of the plate. And then I'm going to, I'll show you, I'm going to make a large orb, probably a little bigger than the one that's there on the table for you to see that on the potter's wheel. All right, so we're going to center up some, a big piece of clay for the big pot. I think the little pot won't be probably 4 or 5 pounds. And so the throwing technique is a little bit of a combination of, well, it's obviously working on the potter's wheel, but I'm using a lot of hand building techniques too, because I'm not going to be able to use both hands the whole time while I'm on the potter's wheel. Surprise, surprise. You'll see how that works. But you have to get really steady and about how you're working on the wheel, and you can make it work. Okay.
Any questions right now?
Yeah, you got to jump in and ask questions, because I might not see you if you raise your hand, so it's not like you're all clamoring at once, so just feel free.
So whatever Maureen just demonstrated on the slab, if you actually look at her work, you can kind of detect, like, that must have been a stamp.
That's right.
Or, can you feel this? That it's raised? So what do you think that was? Yeah, slip trailer.
Yeah.
Right, so if you look at Maureen's work, whatever's on the table or up here, you can kind of detect, now you actually know how it's done, right? Now you see it together in one piece. Instead of little sections, it's all combined. So make sure you look and actually touch it.
You can try different techniques. You don't actually have to use them all in your own work. But if you're drawn to one element of design or one technique of design over another, see about how you can compose it into a box form or a cup form. If you're using slabs, you also have to manage how leather hard things are. A cup form is going to need to be rolled right into a cup. These are probably too stiff to do that, right? So you'll want a softer slab. So you have to manage all that.
Is there a way to like make the what is it called?
The slip
trail, like more, less like raised.
Less raised?
More or less raised.
More or less raised. Well, yes and no. Because it's clay, it will hold its shape during the firing. So my bottle is made so it's fluid enough that I can squeeze it out without having to squeeze too hard. So to get it out of, you might want a bottle that has a little bigger nozzle to leave a little bit bigger trail. But the fact is that the decorating slip is fairly fine clay particles, and if they're too thick, they actually crack. So as they're shrinking, right, because there's water in the clay, there's water in the decorating slip, and as that water evaporates, that clay has to go somewhere, and sometimes if it's too thick, it cracks. Maybe that's a technique or a result that you actually want to cultivate. People do that too. Some people use glazes that get all crackly and separating as a technique. So it's not whether one thing is right or wrong, it's really about your intention behind the design of what you want. So you could layer different slips up. Oh, I was doing bead making for a while too, which is like having hot glaze in a rod in your hand. And a common bead making technique is to layer different colored dots on top of each other. You can melt them so they're all in a pattern, but I started leaving them very raised around the little beads I was making, and then I started layering slips on top of each other to make these little bead towers around edges. So you can develop, those are small layers, so they didn't crack too much because it wasn't super thick or big. Yeah, so I brought you some postcards for you to see too. Like this piece is an early piece. This is it's probably about 28 or 30 inches tall, and it's very, very flush to the surface, right? That writing that's in it is carved into the surface, but there's just glaze on that. And then I started incorporating the slips and the stamping in, and I started doing the earthenware pieces with different colors, making dishes that had texture on the rims, and now all that texture is showing up on the outsides of little sipper cups, and adding more slips and patterning as I go. So these are really distinct sort of measures in my process and progress as an artist. That I kind of like looking back on those things. Just wait till you look back on your high school art. Let's see how this piece goes for centering. The clay softens up. This particular clay is, it sets up quite firmly, and then as as you start working on it, it really softens up a little bit. So maybe this will be enough to add the second. I kind of wanted to make a big piece for you. So moving the clay, getting that clay moved up and down from that center for these big pieces is really important, because this is a lot of clay to open up, put my hand in to get an opening in a wall, and having that compression is really important. So I'm working my way a little bit slowly. Does everybody, did everybody get on the wheel or not yet? Not yet, so.
Because of last year.
That's right. Oh, yeah.
We had no wheels, they were all
That's
individual
right.
desks.
Oh, that's right.
Yep.
Well, so this will be something to aspire to. If you, I don't know, Miss Adams uploaded the video that you saw, but we do have a YouTube channel, Mills and Zoldak Potters, and there are other videos you can watch about I demonstrate throwing cylinders and making handles, making cups and things, and going to, well, not just mine, but maybe any video can be kind of nice. This is maybe not, this is a big piece. You're not going to center exactly like this when you do get on the wheel, so.
Everybody teaches it slightly differently, because for those of you who have been on the wheel, might look at me like, that's not how Ms. Adams taught me. Maybe a little bit here and there, right? And that's okay.
And that's okay, because the point here is you figure out what's going to make it work. You have to understand the process here, right? We have a turning wheel. Everything has to be concentric and steady. I think we're just going to do the one piece.
What?
I think we'll do the one piece. I don't think I'm going to be able to muscle that other piece of clay up like I thought I could.
Just so you have a time frame as well, we have like a little less than an hour left.
Yeah. We'll get back onto those slabs, and try our hand at a few things, and then you'll be able to make some plans for your next project. The painted mural boards look terrific. That's going to be fun to have out in the hallways. making a floor on the bottom of this.
What form are you going for? Like,
I'm going to make an orb similar to the one that I brought.
Jillian, can you start getting, just hold it
You
up?
can hold that one up.
Just hold it up, yeah.
Yeah.
Big one.
It's not heavy. Yeah, so this, actually, this might be about that size when it's fired, right? The clay is shrinking. Clay is going to shrink about 13%. So when we're, everybody's made pinch pots, right? More or less? When you're working with a pinch pot and you've got a ball of clay in your hand and you're pinching and stretching that clay, it pinches and stretches where the clay is thicker, and where the clay is thinner, if you keep pinching and stretching, you can't really go very far without putting a hole in it, right? So leaving the clay, starting with the clay thicker to get a nice full shape is kind of the goal, and that's what I'm doing here too. I'm going to move this clay up into the wall of this pot, but I'm going to leave it very thick. It's probably about that thick right now. And I'm going to put that texture on it and then stretch it into that orb shape. After all the texture is applied. I'm going to start with a cylinder and compress this surface. It's almost impossible not to have throwing rings showing on a piece that you've made on the potter's wheel. These are the throwing rings, right? My fingertips are leaving that. And that's a choice that some potters make to have those throwing rings showing. But because I add so much other pattern onto that surface, I don't like all those throwing rings showing. So I'm going to use that rib tool that I used earlier to compress this surface a little bit. It's just about as, I can go just a smidge more. So quiet and a quiet, nice wheel. All right. Does anyone have questions about anything yet? No? Everybody's seen a pot being made before, right? Potter's wheel? Good. All right. Notice how I keep slowing my wheel down. The taller this piece gets, and the farther along in the process I get, slowing the wheel. The physics. Anybody taken physics in the? Has anybody taken physics yet? Did you love physics?
I'm currently taking it.
You are?
It's fun, but our teacher's new, so we're missing some stuff here and there.
Oh.
It's okay. It's kind of fun though.
Well, the fact that you think it's,
the math of it.
you like the math of it, that's awesome.
I do it random.
I didn't do very well in physics in school, and then I started taking pottery, and this is like physics in action.
Yeah, that's why I took physics. Is I love the applied physics.
Oh,
Especially with
that makes me so happy to hear.
How is this physics?
How is this physics? We've got a turning wheel and a vertical force, and the centrifugal force of that wheel wants to keep this moving out, but my job is to keep it contained and moving up. So I'm applying force this way, and the wheel is applying the force out. you've seen scenes where somebody's on the potter's wheel and it all just goes kaflooey, right? Because that when the speed goes too fast, the clay can't hold itself together, and it just flies apart. So when I'm trying to come straight up this side, I also tell students it's imaginary. It feels like you're pushing forward in order to come up straight, because the wheel wants to take your hand forward, but your elbow and your shoulder are pivot points, and in order to keep that line straight, if I torque it and pull it towards me, the cylinder is off its axis, and so all of that shifts in the design of it. If you think you can watch somebody's body motion as they're doing this and see how that physics can really work. Physics and geometry all the time in pottery. Talk about it a lot. So I'm going to spend a second here to compress this. I'm coming straight up from the side. My elbow is going to leave my leg, move forward just a little bit. I'm pressing in from the outside. If you look carefully, it looks like I'm flattening the cylinder even in order to maintain that compression on the surface to control it so it's going straight up. So I like to use the rib tool on the outside because I want that surface to be compressed, but also you could see how much of that slip I took off the surface, because now I'm going to add more texture back on, add that texture that I did before onto this surface as well.
So wherever you're putting the texture, you have your hand on the inside, right?
My hand is on the inside, and it's not terribly even, right? You could see that it's going to be a little bit uneven as I go, the cylinder. I can't, because I'm pressing in on it, it's going to distort a little bit. But I've had an awful lot of practice on the potter's wheel, and I really have practiced keeping steady. Does anybody do yoga or Tai Chi or something? You have to have your body steady. Your muscles are engaged, but your body is steady. And that's what happens a lot in when you're doing pottery, that you don't have anything to balance against all the time, so you're kind of balancing against yourself, the isometrics of it, to be strong and steady. Whoop. So just like before, I'm not really planning this out, which pattern is going where. I'm just sort of adding in sections so I get a variety of texture. I've got two patterns that are sort of similar in size and scale, and then the one diagonal pattern with its line quality, and I like the way those three textures sort of build together to create some movement around the piece while I'm working. Oh, it dawns on me that I don't do this sitting down at home either. I have a wheel that's on blocks, and I sit on a stool so that I'm leaning differently. So, but this should work. This should work just fine. I'm steady. No problem. I'm going to steady the rim first. And, all right. We're just going to go for it. I cannot touch the outside of this piece anymore.
So you're pushing it out from the
So I'm
inside.
starting on the floor. I'm just letting it go around slowly and moving my hands. You could see where I'm pressing. So when you're throwing a cylinder, you have to move the clay up from the bottom where it's most thick up to the top, and you can only really move in an upward motion from the wheel. You can't move that clay up by going down. But once all that clay is stretched into the cylinder, I can start in the middle and stretch, or I can go back down a little bit to fill in this curve as I'm going. Now I'm going down. I can pick it up at the shoulder. What I'm really doing now is pushing, trying to lift this whole shoulder by pushing up and moving really, really slowly. I'm actually using the back of my wrist to sort of stabilize that rim too as I'm going. Every piece is a little different because, of course, the textures are different, the throwing is different. I don't necessarily have the same thickness everywhere all the time. And so I have to be responsive to the clay as I'm working. Oh, this is nice and stiff right now, the clay. So it's stretching really well. So I always get this started just with my hand inside. And once I start getting a fuller curve, I'll switch and I'll put a tool inside. I'll use one of the rib tools to help stretch. And if you look carefully at that, other orb that I have there, I actually, it's not very symmetrical. It's has some movement to it. The curves are a little different as they go around. And that's because after this piece comes off the wheel, I actually start to stretch it by hand, stretch it with just a rib tool on the inside without using the wheel. So that's like a pinch pot also, like a giant pinch pot. I just use the tool to continue to stretch the wall. So I'm keeping an eye on these that they're leather hard. So while you could imagine making a pinched piece and only stretching the clay from the inside and having texture on the outside. I can imagine draping a slab with texture on it so that the slab is pressed to the inside. There are lots of ways to think about incorporating wheel working or hand building into these techniques. Oop. That's dangerous. All right, I'm going to go back down here. I want this curve to fill in underneath. So I'm using that tool inside.
Is that okay? Okay.
Can you see where that is bulging and pressing out from the tool? This is obviously where it's stretched the most. It's going to be the thinnest right in there, so I have to be super careful not to collapse it. Right here. What do we think?
I think it looks beautiful.
Thanks. I think I can go a little bit farther. What do you think? I think I can stretch it more. I'm pretty sure. You know what I might need to do? I might need to. I'm gonna.
How thin is it?
Looking forward to the torch.
How thin is it now?
How thin is it? You know, it's probably about as thin as a regular pot would be. A third of an inch. This part only has to lift and fill in a little bit more. And this, I'll fill in the bottom a little bit as I go. I'm gonna use a torch. You don't.
I'm confused.
There it is. So this is, I'm just going to set this up a little bit with the heat of the torch. I know you have heat guns in the room, but I usually use a torch. This sort of steams the water a little bit so I can keep working on it. Huh? That's why I brought it. Thank you very much for noticing.
That's version of a heat gun.
I know, but you can see I've got a little bit of wobble here on that rim, and I want to set that shoulder with the torch a little bit, and then I'll be able to lift and lift that shoulder a little bit, and it'll hold its shape a little bit better. It's a lot of pressure on a piece of clay to be turning, having the wheel turning, and my hands rising up, and so the clay has to have a lot of integrity itself to hold it together. Can't go too fast, can't go too slow. There are so many things to think about when you're on the wheel. This feels a little less powerful than I dropped my torch head when I was packing the other day and I dented, so it didn't, oh, maybe the canister's done. Maybe that's why it seems so low. Oh, we'll just use it. We'll use it up. This'll do it. I'll just get this shoulder done. And anybody see any steam coming out of the top yet? Not quite.
If you have like your hands inside while you're doing that, would it
It's gonna get, the steam is gonna come out in there. So steam is super hot, and you don't want your hands near steam, right? So I put my hand there to see if I could feel any warmth yet, and I can. I've seen a video of a Korean, Chinese, I think, potter doing a coiling and throwing technique. So he's got this giant coil piled over his shoulder, and he's adding a big coil on and throwing that wall as he goes. And there's a suspended from the air into the pot is a basket of burning charcoal. So it's warming. Have you seen that? It's so beautiful. He's just sweating and sweating, but it's a huge pot he's making, and that heat is what helps him maintain those shapes. It's a little steamy in there. I don't think I need to worry about that lower section. Let's see if that's not my favorite torch head, but that's okay. All right. So, oh yeah, that's just right. Look at that. It's lifting just beautifully. So I discovered, this is kind of new for me. I just started doing these really large forms in the last 2 years or so. But just this last summer in my own studio, I started making them. Now they're about 30 pounds. This piece is probably 10. So I center 15 pounds of clay on the wheel, maybe a little more than this piece was. And then I center another 15 pounds on a second wheel, and then I stack the first one up onto the second one and recenter as I go. So it's a little easier to get it all centered, but the cylinder goes up to my arm, and so it's very slow stretching. But then I leave it on my wheel overnight, just spinning like this slowly, and that lets the air dry it more evenly. And the second day I can come in, finish stretching it, and I add a collar on, a vase, like sort of a plain collar on to the neck, and I have one piece done in 2 days, and then I take it off and I start the second piece. So really, I've been at this for way long time, and it really, you really are you're paying attention to your studio practice and your process all the time, and developing techniques and processes for what you need to do at any given moment. So I think we're just gonna leave this neck. I'm gonna leave this spinning for a little while like this. Although, now that I said that, this is how I am, I think I'm just gonna press a little bit more right down here at the bottom. We'll see if that doesn't collapse it.
Have you collapsed them a lot before? Like,
Oh,
trying to
yeah.
push it out?
Oh yeah. I get a little too ambitious.
Does that happen to you, like when you're doing like a
Yeah, it's happened. I said to Miss Adams, I said, we'll just blame it on the clay. That'll be fine. No, it does happen, and you know, that's the nature of the beast. And you learn from all of these things. I know maybe you think that sounds kind of trite, but it's true. If I pressed too hard and it collapsed, I'd learn where I had to press differently or how to do that differently. So you look at how that filled in, that last little push, right? I said I had to do it, and that filled in this lower curve very, very differently. And you know, I'll tell you, this is sort of peripheral, but Miss Adams might appreciate this. I was making some of them very, very round, all the way down to the bottom. But when I tried taking a picture of those, they don't photograph well. So I don't make them as round at that lower section anymore. And that is merely a factor of how they look in 2 dimensions. And so that's a funny choice to have to make, but there you have it. There are all these parameters around why and how you make decisions. So that's all. You pay attention to notice what's going on around you, and that's what'll help guide you. Okay, what do we think?
Looks
Pretty
sick.
good?
Looks sick. Yes.
See if I can clean that bottom up a little bit.
Did you think it was a bad thing? I would not. Like, it looks cool.
No, it's all good. I knew what she meant. Kind of gross. I'm going to put my hand in for balance, but just a little bit of stick action down there to clean that up a little bit will make it look even rounder than it looked a second ago once that base is narrowed. And when I'm doing this at home, I would turn, once this piece gets a little more firm, I'll turn it over and trim the base a little bit with a tool, and then I often add a little bit extra texture at the bottom with the tool just to clean it up where I might have skimmed it a little bit more. We're going to leave that spinning for a little bit. I'll come back in a minute to do that, but we should try some techniques on your slabs. All right?
Oh yeah.